what was your journey from conventional medicine to internal medicine? And how did you even move in that direction? Because I think that today we're seeing a lot more of that, but you've been doing this for a long time. So I wonder what that transition was like.
It was a stepwise journey into a lot of left-hand turns and pivots, I think. But the journey began in the Philippines. I took a hard left turn in my career. I was going into engineering, took a year off, and then had the opportunity to birth babies in the Philippines with a group of international midwives. And that experience of being around the birth of human life was so riveting and so engaging that the idea of returning to a program in robotics and machines just couldn't capture my imagination anymore. And so that was my entry point into the health career, and initially thinking maybe nursing, nurse practitioner, and then eventually slippery slope took me into the idea of just going ahead down that medical doctor route. And that journey came along in an interesting point in human history where I didn't realize in the 1990s, none of us knew at the time, that we were about to witness the most extraordinary explosion of chronic disease in human history. We were about to see the complete collapse of the human immune system, the human neurologic system, and the debut of things like attention deficit disorder, gluten sensitivity, Lyme disease, chronic fatigue syndromes, chronic pain syndromes, things that had simply not existed 10 years, let alone in the previous 1,000 years. And so it was a very interesting time to enter into this world of science and medicine at the point where we would lose it all. And now we recognize, 30 years later, that we're now in the midst of this sixth extinction event where we're losing biology at such an extraordinary rate. And we see not only cancer epidemics and autoimmune epidemics and the rest, we're seeing, pandemics and the results of this real disruption of neural anatomy and attention deficit to autism, from Parkinson's to Alzheimer's, and this breakdown in our cell-cell communication such that we would really lose our self-identity in this milieu of inflammation and destruction at the cellular level, which of course is manifesting at the macro level as well. And so we see the dissolution of sociopolitical systems and this polarization and the fear, guilt, shame paradigms amplifying as our biology collapses. So never before so interesting a moment to step into this space. And it's been a real exciting journey into realizing that the end is near of an old paradigm and the beginning is nigh for everything that we perhaps have not even yet imagined, because we are starting to realize that to be human health is to really a description of an ecosystem rather than a single species trying to met out a survival paradigm within a complex ecosystem of life.
One of the reasons why I've been so interested in your work is because I found myself going from being quite a healthy individual to then randomly having inflammation and having gut issues and whatever it may have been. And none of them were things I could even explain. Like I was living a generally healthy diet, or I was pretty active, or whatever it may be, but still I'd started to see all these things. And so what started it in the first place at such a global level? Like what has been going on with our health, the food system and everything else? What's been happening that has caused it today, where I think the majority of us either are experiencing it or know someone who's experiencing it? Yeah.
I think I had to go into the problem before I found some of the answers to your questions there. And diving deeper and deeper into the problem, I was trained in internal medicine, which is general hospital care, kind of your adult medicine and conventional pharmaceutical model, running ICUs and the like. I was a chief resident training residents and med students at the University of Virginia, and was finding that I wasn't finding the answers to how do I make my patients healthier. I was chasing disease, and it was getting more and more difficult, it seemed, every year to actually have a positive outcome with my patients. And so I felt like I needed more training, and I did endocrinology and metabolism for another 3 years. And that training really took me into what is the communication network of this exquisite symphony that we would call a human body. How does the liver talk to the brain? How does the brain talk back to the adrenal glands? How do the adrenal glands talk to those kidneys? And so that was the fascination of that hormonal network of communication. And that drove me down deeper into the second half of that specialty, which is called metabolism. How does energy get liberated within a human cell to manifest life? And the answer, it was just becoming obvious, was that it's actually not the human cell that's creating the energy. It's these tiny little microbes, these little bacteria that live inside of our cells, that was liberating energy for the human cell to thrive upon. And those little bacteria, often called mitochondria, are very susceptible to toxins. I was developing toxins to kill cancer cells and was watching those toxins damage this ecosystem within and then make it very difficult for a cell to recover on a cancer journey. And so it was a realization that this paradigm of poisoning for the effort of health was just a chasing for the wind. So I'd spent 17 years of academia becoming an expert in cellular biology, becoming an expert ultimately in this little niche of chemotherapy, and realizing then at the end, oh my gosh, I'm chasing the wind. No matter how good my chemotherapy gets, it's never going to actually solve the problem that I face, because actually in human history, not a single case of cancer has ever been caused by a lack of chemotherapy. And so it was that kind of slippery slope of root cause, root solution, root cause, root solution to realize I'm not anywhere near the root of this thing. But my chemotherapy was in vitamin A compounds, which are nutrients, obviously, from food systems. And so that was a backdoor into the question of what happened to nutrition, that we would suddenly have all this cancer. If nutrition can kill cancer, where did that nutrient base go? And that led us then to some pretty exciting answers. And I had to leave the university setting at that point because the research that I next wanted to do couldn't really fit into the paradigm of here's a drug, here's the disease. And I was starting to want to ask deeper questions about how does life happen? How does biology happen? So I left in 2010, started a clinic that was, based in nutrition, an idea that nutrition could be the basis for reversing chronic disease and perhaps ultimately preventing it. And that was a daunting and scary moment for me because I had been trained nothing at all in nutrition. And so I was desperately looking for everything I could put my hands on in the nutrition sciences to try to find a path forward. And I was finding that the nutrition science is really disconnected from the deeper understanding of how biology worked. We were practicing kind of 50-year-old beliefs about nutrition with the food pyramid and all this, when in fact we kind of knew already at the biology level that that was a miss. But we hadn't matured that science. And long winding path, it turns out that I found myself back to not recent medicine, but ancient medicine. And we find that long before Hippocrates came along to say we are what we eat kind of thing, Chinese medicine had recognized that we must realize that we are a manifestation of the nutrition, the connection to nature. And maybe deeper than Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, which was a deep field that you've studied extensively with your tea company and everything else. This science of Ayurveda dates back 9,000 years, and comparing that to like 50 years of food science that we throw at the wall right now, it's been proven over and over and over again in vast different people's groups and genetics and everything else. And so in the end, that long winding path took me back into this indigenous realization of we are of nature, we are of the earth. Each one of us is of the earth, and this is why we call ourselves earthlings, I suppose. But this human condition identifies that nature intended us into our existence and into our resilience and into our full potential. And it's in this last 100 years where we've accelerated this march away from that nature and the convenience lifestyles and the technology boom and everything else. And this has been that pivot point of how did we lose health? We simply distanced ourselves from nature further than we'd ever been. And we did it at these fundamentals, as you point out, of the food system. And so that was my slippery slope into what's happened to the food, which took us into what happened to the soil, which has taken us into a realization of, oh my gosh, we became chemically dependent both in our farming practices and our pharmacy of the hospital. And when we took both of those industries and said we will technologically create a new chemical that will allow us to grow food better and be healthier, we lost our underpinnings. We lost the foundation of nutritional health on the planet and the vitality of humanity.
It's incredible, isn't it, that it feels like such small, simple changes, but then they achieve incredible scale, right? Like the idea of if you could find that to be the root, but the rate at which we've all been negatively impacted by it has been colossal. I guess right now, the individuals that are listening and all of us, it's kind of, we're in a challenging place because I think people want to be healthier, but they feel extremely conditioned by how they've been raised, how they grew up, the kinds of foods that they've been exposed to, the types of convenience, as you said, that they have already. And I find that that's probably one of the hardest things is habit change. Because like you said, we've marched so far away from being at one with the environment or being at one with the soil or being so close to our food. And now we're being so far away that it almost feels more abnormal to go back to nature because of the conditioning that exists. And so how difficult have you found it to help people actually reconnect with that which we've forgotten when that's actually who we were, if that makes sense?